And I invite you to turn to John's Gospel, chapter 19. And I'm going to read from verse 14 to verse 22. I invite you to follow along with me, and then we will pray and go through the verses together. This is John chapter 19, verse 14. It says, "Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the sixth hour, he said to the Jews, 'Behold your king.' But they cried out, 'Away with him, crucify him.' Pilate said to them, 'Shall I crucify your king?' The chief priests answered, 'We have no king but Caesar.' Then he delivered him to them to be crucified, so they took Jesus and led him away. And he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the Place of the Skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. There they crucified him and two others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the center. Now Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, 'Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews.' Then many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. Therefore, the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, 'Do not write the King of the Jews, but he said, I am the King of the Jews.' Pilate answered, 'What I have written, I have written.'" Father, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for your word. We thank you for these things in John's gospel. This morning, as we begin to ponder the crucifixion of your Son, we ask that you would remind us of what he went through for us, that you would remind us of your person, that you would remind us of your work, that you'd remind us of our great need for you, and that in all that's said this morning, despite my inability, that the gospel would be simple and understandable. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Okay, so as you come to John chapter 19, right, again, we pick up familiar territory in the Gospels. If you're familiar with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you'll note that in chapter 18, we pick up with the arrest, and we've gone through the trials of Jesus. We are at the kind of the very end of the trial scene before Pontius Pilate, where he is condemned to be crucified, in the very beginning of the crucifixion scene. Lord willing, next week we will pick up more on the crucifixion as well. But we're in familiar territory, right? We're in territory that for us as Christians who know the New Testament and who've read it and who have studied these things, these are familiar things to us. But again, John, he has a perspective, right? He has an emphasis that he puts on, and he gives us certain details that the synoptic writers didn't give us, and he omits certain other things. And because he omits something, it's not because it's not important, it's just because probably he recognizes the Christian community understands these things, and he wants to, supplement and give things other emphasis, other things that weren't mentioned. And so coming right into it, verse 14, it says it was the preparation day of the Passover. Now, there's a lot of discussion on the timing of Passion Week, when Jesus was crucified. There's a lot of debate about it. There's websites dedicated to it. There's a lot of paper exhausted on it, and I'm not going to belabor it this morning, but it is interesting, this phrase, the preparation day. Now, here in John, it's the preparation day of the Passover, so it's even more specific than just the preparation day. But even today, in the Greek language, as they name the days of the week, their Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are actually a testimony not only of the observance of religious Jews in the first century in regards to the Sabbath, but also the resurrection. Their Friday is named after the day of preparation. It's the word preparation. Their Saturday is named after the Sabbath. So in their current naming of the days of the week, Friday and Saturday is preparation day and Sabbath. Okay, the Greek equivalent for those. And then Sunday contains the word kurios, which is Lord. It's the Lord's Day. And I'm not certain on the exact timing when they established those names, but those names are a today real-time testimony of the practice of the Jews of making preparation for the Sabbath day on Friday, and also of the fact that there was a strong witness in the early church of Sunday being the Lord's Day. And so those of you who are familiar with Revelation, where John says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day, there is not only a cultural witness, there's other writings that witness to the fact that the Lord's Day was considered a Sunday. And so this preparation day, when we read Mark's account, yes, it was a preparation day of the Sabbath, or of the Passover, but Mark tells us clearly, now when evening had come, because it was the preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath. So Mark very clearly defines it, Mark 15:42, this is the day before the Sabbath. Now there were Sabbaths attached to Passover, and there's argumentation and all of that stuff, but there is clear historical witness that the preparation day was Friday. That Friday was preparation day. Again, still a standing witness in our current day in the Greek days of the week, the names of the days of the week. We have this from Josephus speaking about the day of preparation just in regards to general Sabbath. Okay, this is Josephus' Antiquity of the Jews, 16:6-2. He says, and that they be not obliged to go before any judge on the Sabbath day, nor on the day of the preparation to it after the 9th hour. So Josephus speaks of the day of the preparation to it, the preparation day for Sabbath, as the day of preparation. This is very early. We have this in Ignatius. This is probably around 110 AD, so it's very early 2nd century. He says, the day of the preparation then comprises the Passion. The Sabbath embraces the burial. The Lord's Day contains the resurrection. And so he speaks of Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Ignatius, very early Christian witness. And he has another quote, actually, where he speaks about Sunday being the Lord's Day. So you have multiple witnesses. This is just information when it speaks about the preparation day. Yes, there could have been a specific and special preparation, and there are some that hold that this Sabbath after the Passover actually landed on the Sabbath, and that's why John says it was a high day. He says very specifically for that Sabbath was a high day. We'll get to that, Lord willing. So he says there about the 6th hour. Now, I feel like I might have already belabored the first point too much, so I want to be extra careful with this one, not to belabor this one too much. So there's discussion about this. Some scholars scratch their head about it. They're not sure. And I'm being open and transparent about that. And I think that the gospel accounts, when you look at them and you see that there's some work involved in some reconciliations between the gospel accounts, I think that's a feature, not a deficit or a problem. I think that shows that when they wrote these things, they didn't try to remove all points of difficulty, right? That these things are given to us, and there's, scholars work through what did John mean, what did Mark mean. Mark refers to Jesus being crucified at the 3rd hour. And A.T. Robertson, a guy I respect, is of the opinion that when Mark says that, he's talking about 9 a.m. Now, we know from the Synoptic Gospels, from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, there were 3 hours of darkness. All 3 Synoptic Gospels tell us that, from the 6th hour to the 9th hour. So just from that, it would seem that John and the Synoptics are not talking about the same 6th hour when they say the 6th hour. Because if Pilate's standing there saying, "Behold your king," and there's these hours of darkness, which seem to come after hours of a crucifixion scene, it seems pretty plain that they're not speaking about the same 6th hour, if that makes sense to you. And so A.T. Robertson proposes that John is using the Roman time frame there, which would put this scene, it's early, I get it, people don't like this explanation because it feels too early, but that would put this scene at 6 a.m., and then the crucifixion taking place at 9 a.m. Now, the biggest problem with that is just that you've got a lot of stuff that happens before this, the scourging, being sent to Herod and back, they're knocking on Pilate's door pretty early in the morning if this is 6 a.m. That's really the only trouble with that. So you guys know about it. There's a discussion about it. Scholars and good guys scratch their heads. Some of them say, we're not sure. And so John says it was about the 6th hour. He's not being precise in his timing here. But he says, behold your king, right? He is taking this accusation that the Jews have brought to him, and he's essentially like, here's your king. I've examined him. I find no fault in him. You've accused him of this. Pilate has scourged him, right? And Pilate throughout this is determined to let Jesus go. And we're going to see that even in the next verse, right? Shall I crucify your king? Like Pilate is determined to let Jesus go. Luke tells us that multiple places. Twice in his gospel, once in Acts, that Pilate was determined to let Jesus go. And so this whole, this is like, when he says, behold your king, for Pilate, it's sarcastic. Because he makes nothing of this accusation, really. He wasn't concerned about it. He was determined to let Jesus go. There was really no substantiation to it. So as he says, behold your king, to him he's being sarcastic. But really, he's presenting the king of the Jews to the Jews, right? And in God's, you've got what's going on in Pilate's mind in all of this, and the things that he says, and then what is the testimony of God in all of this, right? Because God rules in the affairs of men. And so Pilate says to the Jews, behold your king. And really, they needed to take heed to that. But their response was not to receive him, verse 15, but they cried out, away with him, right? People don't want to deal with Jesus. Have you found that in your life? Have you found that in trying to talk with Jesus or talk with people about Jesus, the people you love, your friends, your family members? I remember being exceedingly zealous when I got saved, and it was probably a fair amount of zeal without knowledge, but there's probably something in that young zeal that is holy, though it might not be all that knowledgeable. And I remember calling friends and telling them about getting saved, and telling them about Jesus, and telling them about what God was doing in my life, and confessing sins to them that I probably shouldn't confess. And I was just elated with forgiveness and what God had done in my life. And I was staggered by how busy these people all of a sudden became. Because I would talk to them on the phone and I'd be telling them about Jesus and be like, I'm sorry, I've actually got some stuff going on. I got to let you go. I'm thinking, I know you, dude. You've never been busy. We've wasted countless hours. You've never been busy. You've been anything but busy. But now I'm talking about Jesus, and you're busy, dreadfully busy. I don't know if you guys are the VeggieTales fans in here, but if you are, that's for you. If you're not, move along. It's okay. So they're just way too busy to hear about Jesus, right? And I went through that as a Christian, talking to people, excited. I want to talk to people about Jesus. We're like, I got to go. You don't got to go. You got nowhere to go. You got no job. I know you, right? I know you. And so people don't want to deal with Jesus, right? Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if that's the cry, right? That's the cry of the angry mob. Away with him, away with him. And it's not just away with him, but it's crucify him, right? It's not just that the angry mob wants Jesus out of the picture, but they're violently opposed to Jesus. And so Pilate says, and you can still get from this in verse 15, as late as this is in this scene, shall I crucify your king? He doesn't want to do this. He doesn't want to cave, and he's in a position where he's trying to keep the peace with these Jewish people, and Rome did afford the Jews some religious observation and liberties, and so he is trying to please men, is what he's trying to do. He's trying to gratify the crowd. We read about that in the other Gospels, I think it's Mark that tells us that he was desired to, gratify the crowd. Mark 15:15. And so rather than listening to his own conscience, right, about the witness that Jesus has left in his presence, the fear when he hears the claim that he's the Son of God, he feared even all the more. You guys remember that were here last week? And so he doesn't want to do this, and you can still see this in his question, shall I crucify your king? And in doing this, again, he's making very little of their accusation, very little of their political accusation. He's your king, right? Like he might get in more trouble with Caesar for saying that. And so he doesn't want to deal with it. But the chief priests, they answer and they say, we have no king but Caesar. Isn't that a sad testimony from the priests? Think of this. We think chief priests, it's so easy for us to just think like, the bad religious people of the first century, right? But remember, the chief priests were supposed to be like the holy guys, the Levites, the guys that were supposed to represent God and recognize that he's our king and we yield to him. And they're like shouting out like, no, we just want the political leader, right? All of our allegiance is with Caesar. What a sad testimony it is. And we read in Matthew 27 that Pilate, at some point, he takes water and he washes his hands before the multitude, right? And he's trying to say, I'm doing this, but I don't want to do it, right? And it doesn't really work like that. Like, I'm doing this, but I don't want to do it. Like your hands are getting dirty while you're washing them. It's like brushing your teeth with Oreos in your mouth. It's not working. It's not happening. Eating spaghetti with a spoon, however you want to compare it, it doesn't work like that, right? And so he wants to wash his hands and condemn an innocent man all at the same time. And you can't wash your hands of Jesus. You can't wash your hands of that decision, right? The decision of what to do with Jesus. You can't wash your hands of it. You know, the crowds shout out, Matthew 27:25, his blood be on us and on our children. And when they say that in Matthew 27:25, they don't realize how ironic that is, right? That they're calling for the guilt of his bloodshed to be upon them and upon their children, right? But really what they should have been pleading for was his atonement to be upon them and their children, right? Let his blood be upon us and on our children. There's a great irony to that in Matthew 27:25. So trying to give you some of the synoptic pieces as you go through this crucifixion scene here. And so then we read in verse 16, then he delivered him to them to be crucified. Now, he delivered him to the will of the Jews, but no doubt to the hands of Roman soldiers, right? Crucifixion was overseen by the Roman government, right? And so it's not that the Jews crucified him. They called for his crucifixion, and Pilate delivered him to their will, but really to the hands of the Roman soldiers to administrate this process. And so just like Jesus has kind of gone through the system in regards to scourging, there's a protocol of scourging in the Roman Empire and what they did it for and why they did it and all of that. And he went through willingly that system. Now he goes through the crucifixion system, right? There's a protocol. You just think about, again, we kind of glorify and romanticize, I think, crucifixion. This is like the protocol of executing the death sentence. And so Jesus enters into that system, right? When the word is given, right? It's official, and he goes through this process just like any other crucified person would go through it, right? This was something that they crucified a lot of people. They had a very specific purpose in crucifixion. It was meant to be a sort of a crime deterrent. The title that might be on a cross would be what you did. And when people would walk by, it was usually very public. You would look, and again, crucifixions lasting multiple days, people struggling on a cross, and you'd see what they did, right? You'd see their charges, and that was Rome's way of saying, you want to do what he did? You can end up on a cross just like he did. And that was their way of suppressing and enforcing their law. And so it says, so they took Jesus and led him away. Now your Bible might not have, then they took Jesus and led him away, and that's okay, it's not a big deal. This is actually kind of a nice little point to highlight that sometimes there's variance, right, in the manuscripts of the New Testament where some translations will have this piece and some don't. Well, here, this is an example, and many of the examples of manuscript variants are like this, where it really does not change the narrative, right? This does not change the narrative, and if anything, it actually is extra small in that all three synoptic gospels say indeed that they took Jesus and they led him away. So not only is it a small detail, but it's a small detail that's confirmed in the three other sources. So did they take Jesus and lead him away? Yes. That fact doesn't remain simply on John 19:6, and that's hopefully helpful for you as people will throw that out. Well, there's all kinds of variants in the manuscripts, like word order and spelling and stuff that's found in other places, like the vast majority of them are pretty insignificant. There are some significant ones, don't get me wrong, but the vast majority of them are pretty insignificant. And this is very insignificant because it's in other places. And so they take him, they lead him away, he's led, right? He goes willingly. In John, here, verse 17 says, and he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. Now, some of you that know this scene, you're familiar with the New Testament, you know that John leaves something out here, doesn't he? As Jesus bore his cross. John leaves out Simon of Cyrene, right? All three other Gospels tell us about him. And he is the one who carried Jesus' cross, right? Cyrene, northern Africa, Libya, we don't know much about Simon the Cyrenian. We know the country he's from. We know the name of a couple kids of his. We have this from Mark 15:21. This is probably the fullest verse on him. Then they compelled a certain man, Simon, a Cyrenian, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Now, people will mention that, like, the fact that Mark mentions them by name, probably people that were known by the church. So his kids, quite possibly known disciples and believers around the time Mark wrote his gospel. So it's like, yeah, that's the dad of Alexander and Rufus. Like, oh, Alexander, we go, who's Alexander and Rufus? You know, first century readers, probably Christians would have known who they were. And it says he was coming out of the country and passing by to bear his cross. So they compel him. One thing we know that it wasn't voluntary. It wasn't like Simon saw this and was like, hey, me, I want to do it. Now, us as Christians, we might be like, oh, I want to do that, right? But for him, he's probably in town for the Passover. Because of the Jewish tradition in regards to defilement, though by the letter of the law in the Old Testament, he probably wouldn't have truly been defiled. I would argue from the texts in Numbers that he didn't come in contact with a corpse. That he's compelled, this is the Passover, but for virtue of tradition, he probably would have not been able to partake in any of the rest of the Passover. He's traveled, 800 miles from Libya to Jerusalem, probably to be in town for the Passover, and so his trip is getting ruined here. And they compelled him. The Romans had this right. They had this sort of law where they could, the law of impressment. You know, Jesus talked about if anyone compels you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. that the Romans could impress upon a civilian to carry their gear or burden for a mile. And so he is compelled. He doesn't do this voluntarily. This word compelled, one of the helps I used said it goes back to the Persians, where they had public couriers stationed by the king. And if a man passed by one of these posts, they could be impressed into service by the couriers. Okay? So couriers are mailmen. Right? You think the postman's in a bad mood. Right? You go walking by one of these couriers and they're like, hey, go deliver this. Right? I don't want to go to that neighborhood. You go deliver it. And so to be compelled, to be pressed into service. And so Simon, he does this. He doesn't seem to volunteer himself, but he does it. He's compelled to do it. And what a remarkable experience for Simon. We have this wording in Luke chapter 23, verse 26. It says, now as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon, a Cyrenian, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross that he might bear it after Jesus. It's interesting, that word after, it could mean after in time. But when I looked up its New Testament usage, every other New Testament usage I found was like behind. He bore it behind him. So that is a significant, that could be a significant difference, right? Because behind him means like with him. Not just for him, but with him, which is remarkable. And you can look this up. Matter of fact, the NASB and the ESV, as they translate it, they say that he might bear it behind him. They lean, recognizing the New Testament usage of this was usually in proximity, not in regards to time, that he's like with Jesus, like right there, behind him. And we don't know the details here. There is the patibulum, which would be the crossbar of the cross. Most scholars feel like that's what would have been carried by studying the little bit of literature that we have on this. So it probably wasn't the full cross. I do think that it was the traditional cross. We have some substantiation for that. There's even graffiti, old graffiti, I think it's first century, that's a mockery of the crucifixion, and it depicts a T-shaped cross. John says that they attach this sign above his head, and so many also early witnesses to the T-shaped cross. When you study crucifixion, one of the things you find is that Rome mixed it up. Sometimes they would do a vertical pole by itself. Sometimes a person would be upside down. Sometimes it would be the sort of cross or X type crucifix. They mixed it up. And there's actually, as reluctant as I am to mention the article on Wikipedia, they actually do a pretty good job on crucifixion. And I would encourage you to, if you look that up, to look up the sources and discern what sources are. Somebody wrote a book on this, or some sources are this is like first or second century information. I tend to lean towards the stuff that's contemporary, the first and second century stuff. But quite probably the crossbeam. And Simon is he's compelled into this. He's pulled into this. Luke says they laid hold on a certain man. They're like, "Come here, you do this," and we don't know. We don't know. Did they pick him out because of the way he looked? We don't know. We don't know. We know he was from Cyrene. We know he was from Libya. We don't know. Other than that, we don't know. But what we do know is that this scene, he's passing by. He's passing by. Mark said he's passing by. You ever been passing by and something happens and it's like maybe the Lord wants you to be involved in that and you're like, I don't want to deal with that. I'm just passing by. I don't want to be involved with this. Do opportunities of service sometimes just like, hey, there's this thing, there's this person that's like, there they are. And you're like, I don't want to see that. I'm here for the Passover. I'm on vacation in Israel for the Passover. I don't want to deal with that. I'm just passing by. Well, this opportunity, right? What cross-bearing opportunities might we just so happen to be passing by this week, right? What cross-bearing opportunities might we pass by this week? What opportunities to serve him? And to be close to him in that, if Luke's text is to be taken that he was behind Jesus, he's like right there with Jesus. And he's there for the Passover, which is the Passover lamb and all the religious stuff. But what's all that point to? Jesus carrying this cross. And he might have been in one sense excluded from the religious observance of the Passover, but he was maybe one of the closest people in human history to the real Passover, right? To be right there with Jesus. Like, did he smell the spikenard from Mary? Don't know. So they come to the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. Now, there's debate on this also, the location of the crucifixion. I have an angle. I have an opinion on the matter. It makes good sense. I think it's Gordon's Calvary. You can look this up. You can find pictures of this. There is north of Jerusalem, north of the city, and Jesus suffered, it tells us in Hebrews, outside the gate. John tells us that this was a very public place. So there is, north of the temple, north of the city, there is this place where there is this skull-shaped kind of little couple caves that make out eyes, and you can even see a mouth. But the oldest image, the one you're looking at now, is from the late 1800s. So who knows what this looked like, 2,000 years ago. It's still there this day. You can still see the almost like the sort of eye socket and nose look to this thing. It is pretty remarkable. There's been a fair amount of erosion. There's a bus stop right beneath it, but it does really, when you look at pictures of this, it really totally looks like it could be the stage of redemption for all of human history. I mean, the way there's it's a precipice, and the way there's a road that goes right in front of it, and it's elevated, and so if there were people up on crosses up on this little cliff, the place of the skull, it is remarkable. This, I'm also inclined to think that this is probably in the vicinity where Abraham offered Isaac. We know that it was Mount Moriah that Abraham took Isaac to, and we're told in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1, that that's where Solomon built the temple, was on Mount Moriah. And so who knows how many years prior Abraham bringing his son there, you come up to Jerusalem, you come up to the mount, and then beyond that there's this plateau and then this other cliff, and so it could very well be that this is the place where Abraham took Isaac. I can't be certain on that, but it's people talk about it. And Genesis 22 says that Abraham called the name of that place where God provided a substitute, right? God provided a substitute for his son, that he called the name of the place, "The Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." In the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Now, think about all the sacrifices that took place at the temple. They took place at the mount of the Lord, right? Mount Moriah, 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1. That's where Solomon built the temple. But what else was provided, right? Atonement was provided. At one point in human history, in Jerusalem, Jesus at this scene. It's remarkable. It says, there they crucified him. The place of the skull, Golgotha. You read Luke's gospel, he has Calvary there. It's interesting, it's still just the Greek word for skull. I don't know why translators translated it Calvary, other than maybe an affinity for the Latin Vulgate. They pulled the Latin. So Calvary is Latin for skull. So, we're in affiliation with Calvary Chapel. We're in affiliation with Skull Chapel. That's pretty cool, huh? It's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So that's where they crucified him. And I mean, just, the gospel writers give us the scene. They give us the outside information. They don't really get into the details of crucifixion, probably because it was so detestable. It was so gruesome and so graphic that it's not like they're going to talk about all the details of it. So they just say, and they crucified him. And they don't get into the details. We do know from Matthew's gospel that they offered him sour wine mingled with gall, probably to dull the pain. And it seems that they did that early as you read Matthew's account of it. So part of the torture of crucifixion was the longer it lasted, the better, so to speak, right? That's Rome's approach here. This was not, they could have put people to death quick if they wanted to, right? That's not the purpose with crucifixion. The purpose with crucifixion is to make a point, to make an example out of somebody, to put them through excruciating suffering. That's where we get the word excruciating. We get it from crucifixion. And so I don't want to belabor the details of it, but I do, like in our clean and shiny Christian culture, I do want you guys to know some of the details of what it was, because we've kind of romanticized it a little bit. There's not a lot of archaeological evidence for crucifixion in the way of skeletal stuff. Many times when somebody was crucified, they were left on the cross. When they were they typically weren't buried. Burial is what many times preserves remains. And so they would many times their bodies would be thrown in the dump, burnt, dogs eat them, whatever, right? So not a lot of remains. There are 3, maybe 4 heel bones that they think are related to crucifixion. And if you're freaked out by this, I'm sorry, just try not to look at it too much. But the first one they found, and there's a mock one on the one side, and then there's what's left to try to show you. This one was from Jerusalem. I think the date was around 1968 when they found this. The nail was bent. And this is going through the heel bone sideways. Large spike driven straight through the heel bone. So as a Catholic kid growing up, I used to see Jesus was always still on the cross, and his feet were crossed over, and the nail was down here in the middle of his foot where the small bones were. And I thought, well, the nail, and I thought about this kind of stuff. The nail probably just went between the bones. No, Romans, at least on multiple accounts, drove these spikes through the heel bone. I mean, it's unimaginable what that would have been like. There was another one found in Italy. The nail wasn't in it. This is one heel bone, but you can see the size of the hole. They think that this was from crucifixion. Clean hole on one side, exit hole on the other side. This was found in Italy, I think, around 2007. And then the most recent one was found in England, in the UK, and this was found in around 2017. And so you have yet another heel bone with a nail through it. And all of the ones with the 2 with the nails, I think there's only 2 that have been found with the nails in them. In both of those cases, it was sideways through the heel bone, and the nail was only long enough to go through one heel bone. So what they think might have been the case was that the legs were nailed to the side of the upright post, not crossed like we would normally think, not even necessarily turned sideways, because you would need a nail long enough to go through both unless they separated their feet and turned them sideways. But we think that their feet were individually nailed, one on either side or turned. And so just the process of being nailed to the cross, right? This is I realize it's graphic, but I want you to understand what the Lord went through, right? What he went through that day on our behalf as they nail him to this cross. And people have written medical articles to deal with how they think crucifixion would have taken somebody's life, that they generally think maybe asphyxiation, but they're not sure. They've tried to replicate it, but when they replicate it, they're not replicating it by somebody volunteering to actually drive spikes through their wrists. So they're taking out of the equation the impact on the major nerves of the arm and everything. So they don't really know. Some think heart failure and things like that, just the amount of time. And scourging, again, many people would not survive the scourging. They called that the half-death. And so their backs were laid raw. They're put up on a cross as the weight of their body hangs on these pegs. They have a desire to push up, to be able to breathe and to be able to take pressure off, at the very least to be able to take pressure off their arms. And then pushing up, they're pushing on these spikes that are driven through their heels, and their back is raw this whole time. And this goes on. This just goes on, and unless the soldiers got to get home for a football game, you know what I mean? This goes on unless the soldiers need to leave, and then they'll go in, they'll break the leg bones so that they can't push up anymore, which really gives some credence to the idea that they would suffocate. And so this was brutal. This was brutal. I mean, we can't imagine the brutality of it. In our day, and this is what Jesus went through for us. And we know that there were two others with him, right? One on either side. Man, what a gospel presentation there is with them, right? Because if you know the account, you know from Luke's gospel. Anybody familiar with the thief on the cross? Is that familiar to anybody, the thief on the cross? That one of these two guys repented on his deathbed. They very well likely could have been conspirators with Barabbas. Barabbas was, again, a violent criminal. He was an insurrectionist. He was in for not only robbery, but for murder. These guys were violent criminals. They both deserved what they got. And there they are, and Jesus is right there in the middle, right? Isn't that remarkable? Right? You've got two men, both guilty, both face to face with death, and both face to face with Jesus, the solution to the problem. Their guilt and death, right? They're guilty and they're going to die. And beloved, apart from Christ, that's the truth for everybody. We're guilty and we're going to die. We need to know Jesus. Which type of criminal are you? Are you a forgiven criminal or are you a stubborn criminal? There's only two types of people in this world. Guilty sinners and forgiven sinners, right? And so this one thief, they joined together, it seems, Matthew and Mark, they joined together in reviling Jesus as all the people are sneering at him. He saved others, himself he could not save. They didn't realize what they were saying when they said that. And these two thieves were right there with the rest of them. And something clicks in the heart of this one where he recognizes, right? Jesus is praying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing through this process of being crucified. And so we don't know. I mean, there was the procession. Are the criminals being led in the same procession? Do they hear Jesus say to the women who are weeping, daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me? He knows what the future holds for Israel? And does he, what all, he's seeing the sign above his head, and what is, he puts it together, right? He puts it together. This man claimed to be the Son of God. This man claimed to be a king, as a kingdom that's not of this world. And the thief on the cross begins to put it together. And he makes a very simple request. It's in Luke chapter 23, verse 39. Yeah, that's where it starts. It says, verse 39 of Luke chapter 23, then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him and said, if you're the Christ, save yourself and us. But the other, verse 40, chapter 23 of Luke, rebuked him, saying, do you not even fear God, seeing we are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive our due reward for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. And then he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said to him, assuredly, I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise. Isn't that something? You think about what was the confession of this thief? We're guilty. Jesus is innocent. Simple confession. And then a simple request. Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That's pretty simple, isn't it? Like, does that count as the sinner's prayer? Pretty sure it does. If it's from a sincere heart. Acknowledge your guilt. Look to Jesus for forgiveness. Luke chapter 23, verses 41 and 42. Jesus says, assuredly, I say to you, today you'll be with me in paradise. So, verse 19 of John 19 as we wrap this up. Now Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Now, you study the gospel accounts, you'll have, this is Jesus, King of the Jews, this is the King of the Jews, the King of the Jews. You have a few variants of it. John probably gives us the most full description of what was on that plaque or whatever was nailed or fastened to the cross. And John includes Jesus of Nazareth, right? And so that's like not a small thing. We just think like Jesus of Nazareth, that's what he goes by. That's how we refer to him. Well, that was scornful. Nazareth was, there was a contempt with that, right? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Right? And so no prophet has ever arisen out of Nazareth. We've covered these things already in John's gospel. And so it's like Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And it's remarkable that it's like, this is the King of the Jews. Yeah, this is the King of the Jews. It is Jesus of Nazareth. Yeah, Nazareth. Yeah. And he is King of the Jews. Yeah. And he is come to save, and he is, whether he looks like it or not, saving right now as he's on the cross. Right? He is accomplishing the work of salvation on the cross, doing what the Messiah came to do. Not to deliver the Jews from Roman oppression, but to deliver them from their greatest enemy, which is sin and death, right? And so there he is, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And so they would, again, often put these titles on as a, so far as I know, to say this is what the person did, and it was a crime deterrent, right? You do this, this is what you'll get. Insurrectionist, here you go, right? And so there is maybe something here, a couple commentaries mention in their commentary on Colossians, where Paul, speaking to us, says that Christ in his work on the cross has wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us. He has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. There's multiple thoughts on what Paul might mean there, but some guys suggest that this could have been possibly alluding to this accusation that is affixed to the cross of the criminal to say this is why they deserved crucifixion. And so possibly Paul could have some other sort of debt cancellation thing in mind there as well. But verse 20, many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, right? Near the city. And so this was a very public thing, very public place. It would seem by this and the response of the Jews coming back to complain to Pilate that some time passes in the crucifixion, right? Again, Mark gives it as early as 9 a.m. The 3rd hour to the 9th hour gives about a 6-hour time frame for the crucifixion. And so very busy time of year at Passover. There's multitudes coming by, and if it is this Gordon's Calvary where there's this precipice, this is like a stage to put men on display who are crucified. And there in the middle of these 3 crosses is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And the Jews go by and they read it. And it says it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. And not to even get into the Hebrew and Aramaic stuff. They probably spoke Aramaic. Hebrew was probably more for the reading of the Scriptures. Latin was the official language of the state. Greek was the common language. So it's written so everybody can read it. Right? Everybody can read it. And so doesn't matter how religious you are. Doesn't matter how much pull you have with the government. How common or insignificant you might think you are. There's coming a day when men stand before God. Right? And there is Jesus, the King of the Jews, Jesus of Nazareth. And you need to know what you're going to do with him. Right? What are you doing with Jesus? It's a day when small and great will be raised. They'll be brought before the throne of God. The books will be open. And God would have all to know that this Jewish carpenter from Nazareth is the Messiah, right? That he's come not to deliver the Jews from Roman oppression, but to take care of sin and death. And this is put in every language so that everybody can understand it. And it's worded, not only is Pilate... I'm sure Pilate got a little bit of delight writing that 3 times the way that he did. This was sarcasm for him, and this was a jab at the Jewish people, which he is, at this point, he is had it, right? And they've forced his hand in this, so he feels, put him in a position where he could do none other than what he did. And so they come to him, verse 21, and they say, don't write the King of the Jews, but he said I'm the King of the Jews. Like they get that this looks like a proclamation instead of an accusation. Right? They're like, wait a minute. Don't give him credit where credit isn't due from their perspective. You need to say that this was his claim, not really who he is. And Pilate answered with some backbone, right? What I've written. It's like, this is like it is what it is of the Bible. It is what it is. I'm not changing it. I've written what I've written. Like, deal with it is what this is. Like, deal with it. And so this stands firm. God, in presenting his Son to humanity, putting this title on here, overseeing the affairs of men, makes sure that this is communicated as a title of who he is, not a claim that he made. Right? The wording. We're just talking a couple words different. He said, I am. Right? No, that's not how God would have it. And so the people that would walk by, and no matter what language they spoke, they would look up and they would see this man crucified on this cross, and it would say, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Matthew Henry had this to say, as Balaam when he was sent for to curse Israel, blessed them all together, and that 3 times. So Pilate, instead of accusing Christ as a criminal, proclaimed him a king, and that 3 times in 3 inscriptions. Thus God makes men to serve his purposes quite beyond their own. All right, Pilate's mad and being sarcastic, and in the meantime, God is, at the end of the day, making a proclamation about his son. And so, how do you get saved? Well, it's by looking to Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, on the cross, and looking to him as the solution for your sin. So is Jesus just some man who made claims of having a kingdom, or is he your Lord and your Savior? Right? You have two things set before you here. The Jews that say, no, that's just what he claimed. And then you have what's written. Right? So which are you going to go with? Father, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for your word. We thank you for these things. And Lord, we thank you for our redemption. That through Christ's work on the cross, you present us holy and blameless and above reproach in your sight. And that's not anything about what we've done, about what we've accomplished, but it's all about what your Son has accomplished. So we thank you for the cross. Help us to never take it for granted. Help us to be constantly reminded of what he went through for us. And we ask it in Jesus' name.